Hello. Hello and welcome to Dungeons and Hyperlinks, a presentation by Jens Ohlich and Nika Bertram about interactive fiction novels, basically text-based role-playing games. Well, have fun.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. We're going to talk about something that, may result in some of you leaving the room because it's going to be about literature, and some of you might want to leave to play with your technical gadgets. We're okay with that, but we think we're on a mission to bring something of the arts to the geeks as well. So enjoy. My name is Jens Ohlich. I've been involved in the CCC for some years now. I think it's 17 years, and with me, and I'm very happy, is Nika Bertram, who's a novelist from Cologne, and she has also some very unique experiences with interactive fiction. So, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about interactive what? It's interactive fiction. Most people nowadays know them as text adventures. And what I found remarkable was that in 1983 there was actually a review of a text adventure of a piece of interactive fiction in the New York Times Book Review, which laid out some of the characteristics of these works of fiction, like it's more like a genre of fiction than a game, or there are like games which have been called participatory novels, interactive fiction, or my favorite, participa stories. So that's what we're going to talk about. And those who don't know what it is still, but want to know, it's interactive fiction or text adventures are almost purely textual games where you interact with the world through simple English commands, typically like go north or take lamp. There are interactive fiction pieces in languages other than English, but they're not as widespread. Personally, I can say I learned a lot of my English through interactive fiction and text adventures. So, for short history, I mean, the idea of having something interactive, generating text, is actually very, very ancient. If you want to scratch the definitions a bit, you could go back to things like the I Ching, the fortune-telling method, algorithmic method that was used in ancient China. You could also say that some experiments with text automatons carried out by the scientist who goes by the name of Raimundus Lullus are, in a way, generated text and interactive fiction. You could also say that some methods that are used in Kabbalistic studies are about generating text, but the most clear ancestors of what we now know as interactive fiction or text adventures are game books that are, at least in the English-speaking world, known as Choose Your Own Adventures. These were books where a story was told, and then at some points of the story you were given a choice, like if you want to go to the beach, read at page 178, or if you want to climb the tree, go to page 220. Then in 1975 something remarkable happened. A guy named Will Crowther actually wrote the first piece that is a recognizable piece of a text adventure or interactive fiction. The background story was he was a computer programmer who went through who had a family crisis, and he was missing his two daughters, and in order to get into contact with his two daughters, he did what every geek would do. He wrote a computer game for them that would run on the forefather of the internet on the ARPANET, on a mainframe, on a PDP-10 written in Fortran, because he had another hobby, which was exploring caves in America, and he took his daughters on some of these expeditions. A cave game seemed appropriate, and because he wanted his little daughters to play that game, he made the game in a style that you could interact with the game through natural language, like go north, take lamp, enter that and that room. And because at that time and age, copyright wasn't such an issue as it is today, the game spread throughout universities in the US and was modified, and most universities had their own copy of that game called Adventure at some point. It was also tried to be commercialized by a guy called Scott Adams, who's not the author of Dilbert, but some other Scott Adams, under the name of Adventureland. But what is probably more significant, in 1977, a group of MIT students who really liked that game got together and wrote their own version of Adventure, and using the slang they used at that time for an unfinished or a work in progress, they called it Zork. Zork was the name of the file given to anything that was not yet finished. And after some time, these students graduated, and they came up with the idea of, after graduation, make a software firm. Of course, they wanted to write real software, stuff like databases or applications for companies, but what they really had at that point was that little computer game, and they said, well, let's start with that one, and then eventually we will do real stuff afterwards. Little did they know that for the next 10 years they would be writing text-based computer games, very much like Zork. Infocom is actually very interesting. Some of the classics that they published are still played today. Zork I already mentioned, which is a game where you go through an underworld. It's one of these dungeon games. Even more interesting is a collaboration they did with the late British author Douglas Adams, who actually participated with programmers at Infocom writing an interactive fiction version of his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Also, there's a work by Infocom widely recognized as a masterpiece called Trinity. Trinity starts with you being an American tourist in London on the eve of World War III, which is about to break out, and you have to travel to time and space to prevent that World War III. There's another interesting work called Mind Forever Voyaging by Infocom, where you play an artificial intelligence who is programmed to test out various political models in a future world and see how these various political models would work out in reality. And there's another piece which is, one of the rare examples of adult entertainment in interactive fiction called The Leather Goddesses of Phobos. It's not really boring, it's not about having sex all the time, but there are some scenes in it which are suggestive, and I find it remarkable that they actually thought that the target group was old enough to sell enough copies of a game which had a mature audience. So I've talked a lot about these games in theory. Maybe it's best to show them in practice a bit. First example of how things go I want to show is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which Douglas Adams actually participated. He didn't do the programming, but he wrote all of the text, and it starts with you waking up in a room the room is spinning very gently around your head, or at least it would be if you could see, which you can't, and it's pitch black. Now, interesting about this game is, even if you know the novels, even if you heard the radio plays, this game is yet another iteration of the story that is told in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And Douglas Adams once said that he likes this version of the Hitchhiker Guide the best. So, what do you do at this point? You turn on the light. Thank you. This is getting really interactive. So, good start to the day. Pity it's going to be the worst of your life. The light is now on. And then you see the bedroom. The bedroom is a mess, and lots and lots of items are mentioned which you can take and which you need in the further course of the game. Now, a lot of attention was paid to details, like you could actually look under the bed. Oh no, I'm still in the bed, I have to get up first. Looking under the bed is not a move that is significant in the game, but actually they wrote a text for that. Like you don't find anything there, but a few soiled handkerchiefs, a book you thought you'd lost, a couple of foreign coins, and something else which can't be fully described in a family game. So this is basically how you play interactive fiction. The next steps would be getting something to wear. There is a dressing gown over the chair. When you look at the dressing gown, you see there's something in the pockets. Pocket fluff. That's another word that entered my English vocabulary through interactive fiction. And eventually you find some medicine that you can take to get rid of that headache. Now, another example I want to show is from the leather goddesses of Phobos I mentioned before. First gives you a disclaimer that some of the material in the story may not be suitable for children. And then it goes on and says, yeah, if you don't like that, flip out the disc now and drive evidence in hand to your dealer, your lawyer, or your favorite repression-oriented political. But if you actually choose to play the game, then it starts like this. You're in a bar in Ohio, and the time is 1936. Now, what I find remarkable about this game is it can be played in two variations. You can either play it as a female or as a male character. It would be boring to just ask the player to say, what is your gender? So they start with you having to pee. And you have to go to the toilet. And depending on which toilet door you use, the gender of your character is determined. Actually, if you play through the game, you will meet someone, and that person will have a different name depending on what gender you initially chose. And if you refer to that person with the wrong name according to the gender you chose, the game will give you a remark like, oh, I see you're the type that swings in both directions. Now, this is still very far apart from modern Judith Butler style gender theory, but I think for a video game it's really a start. I mean, I haven't seen something where you could actually play with gender in that form. And I don't think, for instance, Tomb Raider is a good example. It's just, you know, that's even more gender stereotype, but this is very cleverly made. And I also like the idea that you have a puzzle at the beginning, and this will determine the outcome of the story or how you play the story. But getting back to Infocom, what was interesting about them was their quality writing. It actually had literature qualities. You could read them as books, and many of the works of Infocom were actually sold to people, 30 or older. I think it's a market group that is not catered by many of today's video games. It had a very advanced parser. There were some restrictions, but to a certain extent, you got the feel that it actually understood natural language. And what was the most exciting thing about it is that it had high portability thanks to the so-called Z machine. The Z machine was a purely fictional CPU, a virtual machine, before Java made the term popular. And at that time that Infocom was operating, they closed the business in 1989 and started their business in 1978. There was a problem. There was a huge diversity of home computers at people's homes. Like some people would have a C64, some people would have an Apple II, Atari computers, whatever. Some of the video game programming companies solved that problem by focusing on one brand of machines, and Infocom thought we could sell more copies if we would just cater to all the system at once. So what they did, they designed that virtual machine, a machine with the only purpose of playing text adventures, and then wrote the story files, which were the actual programs to run on that virtual machines. They wrote that on a Unix workstation, and then the text, the story files could actually run on all of the home computer machines, and they would have to implement the virtual machine only once for every system, and then it would give them an endless supply of story files. Now, if you look at text adventures or interactive fiction from a literary critique standpoint, I think they're highly post-structuralist, and I think people like Foucault or Umberto Eco have described it best. What, even if it's pop culture at its best and it's only video games, it wouldn't have been possible without shaping people's minds before through ideas that came from the post-structural debate. The debate that said discourse or interacting, creating your own fiction is actually the most important element of a narrative. The idea of the lector and fabula, or the reader in the story itself, that Umberto Eco proposed, or simply the literary tradition of postmodernism with authors like Jorge Borges, James Joyce, Italo Calvino. People got used to reading stories that consisted largely of, the reader making out what the story is itself. And it was necessary first to get people's mind in that direction in order for them to enjoy a genre like interactive fiction, I'd say. So, in summary, even although I think some of the stories in interactive fiction and text adventures are maybe not that high in terms of literary critique, they could not have been possible without the whole postmodernism movement in literature before them. People would simply not have understood what it is like to create your own story through reading it. Now, by 1989, 1990, Infocom closed its doors and the genre of interactive fiction was dead commercially, actually. A very nice quote I found in The Guardian one day was, interactive fiction is unique in that point, that is the one literary genre that sells even worse than poetry. and graphic adventures like Myst or the Lucasfilm adventures took over. Probably most of you have played things like Monkey Island, something like that, and people didn't seem to be interested in, you know, interacting in a textual world, reading shitloads of pages where a narrative unfolds and so on. People just wanted point and click and lots of graphic effects. In 1993, something remarkable happened. The format of the Z machine was reverse engineered, and shortly after it was reverse engineered, a British professor of mathematics by the name of Graham Nelson published a compiler for that Z machine called Inform. And Inform was a programming language for text adventures or interactive fiction. And it was designed in a way that you would design a new language. So it looked a bit like, you know, Python or a bit like C, with having, you know, semicolons at the end. And for a lot of programmers, it was really good. For at that point, for the first time, they were able to write their own interactive fiction, write their own text adventures that would run on the classic Z machine. But in 2006, after I think 4 years of work reworking the compiler, something even more remarkable happened. Graham Nelson decided to throw away this computer science style language and go for a radical change. Nowadays, this is how you write interactive fiction in Inform 7. The actual source code of this piece of interactive fiction can be read out as natural language. It starts with the story genre is fairy tale, the story headline is blah blah blah, and you can have includes like use no scoring, the serial comma, and American dialect. It comes with an easy-to-use IDE where you have the documentation on the other side. And you can also browse through the world, see all the objects that you created by just saying so-and-so is such and such. Now, many people might have experiences with languages that claim that they possess natural language, like stuff like AppleScript, and after some point it gets a major pain in the ass, because normally computer programming doesn't work that way. It might look easier, but then after some time you find out it's just, you know, syntactic sugar and really no use for solving computer science problems. But with describing a world and describing how objects interact in that world, it really works amazingly well in Inform 7. So this is an example of how you would write source code in Inform 7. East of the garden is the gazebo, above is the treehouse. With this information, it already creates the rooms and creates the objects and creates the ways to go from one object to the other, from one room to the other. A billiards table is in the gazebo. On it, referring to the billiards table, the compiler knows that, on it is a trophy cup. A starting pistol is in the cup. Now, implicitly, you have created a lot of objects and have told the compiler where they are, how they interact to each other, and what to do with them. And it works extremely well. If you go to the campsite wiki, I've written a piece of interactive fiction called Reconnaissance at Finofort. You can find it at the campsite wiki under propaganda. You can download it and play it and find some of the bugs I left for the reader to discover because I was short on time. And this is actually written with Inform 7. It took me 4 months to write it, but the language was the least of my problems. You know, writing the story in a language which is not my native language was much more harder. And you can actually do computer science stuff, like programming in Form 7. You can say a weight is a kind of value, which is a fancy way of saying this is a variable. 10 kilograms specifies a weight. Everything has a weight. So, you know, this is a member data that is applicable to all objects of that kind, of that class, so to speak. A thing usually has a weight of 1 kilogram. A container has a weight called breaking strain, and so on. So you actually, in natural language, describe something that would be pretty hard to describe in that way using C or C-like language. And I find that for that specific purpose actually easier to use. Now, that's all I wanted to say about interactive fiction from my point of view. I'm also interested in your comments after the talk, but before I will switch over to Nika, who is a novelist. I think she will introduce herself as well.
Okay, this works. Yeah, hello, my name is Nika Bertram. I'm from Cologne and a novelist. It's been some time now, actually, that I've written this game I'm going to show you. But honestly, I don't think so much has changed since then, at least not in the German literary scene, but I'll come back to this later. So what I'm going to present tonight is the making of and the history of our game, and I give you a short game demo, very short because we haven't got so much time, and you can download and play it online. And finally, I'm going to tell you something about my personal experiences I made, with the literature market business, a very strange reaction to that. Well, let's start. First, of course, there was the book. A novel written or published in 2001 at Eichborn, and you could say it's about a half-human, half-fictional comic artist who got lost in her own comic world. And because the year I got the publishing contract was 1999, was the new economy craze, I also wanted to do a website, but not a simple boring one. So I thought, well, why not also create a MUD to this story, which I called the Kahuna MUD. It's still alive, it's still up and running. You find it on the website of kahunamodus.de/mud.html. But then, because of Jens, he had told me about those interactive fiction games. And so I sat down and started myself to write a text adventure game. But I have also to admit that this is how far I had gone. It's not very far developed. It's only the start. Finally, then I met another person called Jens Halm, by the name Jens Halm. And he was a specialist for Lingo, the programming language, and he said, he wanted also to do a text adventure with me, but to use Lingo for that, and which is why we finally ended up and decided to build this version of the game, the Kahuna Mode fiction game. As you can see, we wanted to include some graphics, we wanted to extend from the text part, but we had some very vicious ideas for that. So what was the concept and the cunning plans? What we did was, our plan was really a bit weird, because we took with Lingo and Macromedia's director a very high-end multimedia CD-ROM production software where you can do lots of blinking lights and stuff. But we took it to create a text adventure, to have a retro feeling of a text adventure. So for me, as the conceptor or the author of it all, my role was not only to write a screenplay or to act as a director, but it was a bit like having to invent a whole filming technique, by the way. just before I could start. So I think our most vicious plan was to let people not use the mouse. We disabled mouse clicking because we wanted to enforce them to enter the retro-style command line, like in the old text adventures. I also didn't want to fall back on ready-made software like StorySpace. We wanted to create an accessible and expandable interface for playing and writing those text adventures. But of course, we also had to include some gaming aspects like help and save function, a cool intro, rules and riddles, and some nifty special effects. So basically, to create a game like this, first what you do is you do some game design, the overall game design to decide what colors you want. You have to design which structure, if you wanted to have linear structure or non-linear, and of course the genre, if you want to do a text adventure or ego shooter, very important. Also, you have to decide which authoring software you're going to use, either if it's Inform or program like Director, about the interface and programming language. All these things were for us decided simply because, I had the programmer Jens, who was a lingo specialist, so we chose Director. Also, you have to choose your content design, which just means that you have to think what you want to do with your elements, your pictures or your text. You can, as you know, you can either write things down, you can illustrate them, let people hear them or interact with them, or just simply riddle them about in animations and stuff. For me, basically, my job first, because there was a novel before, I had to reduce the story to transform it back down to its basic elements. That means mainly the main characters. You have to include things like red herrings or actions, rooms and places. And it's very important to think action-centered, to think what can the characters do, actually. You have to put out those scenes, and you have to think, it's best to think in spaces, rooms. You have to attach the actions to the rooms, which this is what's going to make it more playable. Because actually this is more important to follow a straight chronology, from the story, conventionally written. Finally, if you have written down those elements, you have to design a new network or hypertext from them. And to do this, you can either lie out your index cards on your floor, you all know this method, or you can use the mind mapping software, which is what we did, or I did. And this is a screenshot from the program I used. It was called Inspiration. And as you can see, this is quite twisted, actually. Don't try this at home. I also have to...
If I may intervene, for my writing experience of the interactive fiction I did, I just filled 2 Moleskine notebooks with random notes about everything. And I never thought that it would be that complex to write a story like that.
Yeah, that was also because I also wanted to do some... I'll come back to this later to tell you the difference between... There's a bit difference between text adventure and hyper-fictional novels or text, where you're driving the non-linear structure to the extreme, one can say. And also, I wrote down the novel in my Moleskine before. So actually this part was a lot of fun to do, but also because I could fall back on the novel, which had been finished before, so I knew the story. It was nothing new to me. If you don't know your story before, well, that's a bit of a problem. And now I'm going to show you some of the basic concepts of Director. You have what I think is a very nice metaphor language of a program. they talk about a stage, main stage, a score, which is like a screenplay, and you have cast members, text members, you can, as they say, drag on stage whenever you want to. You have sprites, which are instances of those members when you draw them or drag them on the stage. And you can perhaps imagine that for me as a writer, this concept of dragging fictional characters and spirits or sprites on stage, yeah, I fell in love with this program completely at first. Of course, as I said, the scripting language we used was Lingo, and the player you need to play this game is Shockwave. And here's an example of one text cast configuration member, one of 431 members I wrote. This was basically my job, to write down, yeah, you see the text, and also to write in the comments field, you see in the red center. There I gave the syntax for the program to work, to change rooms. The syntax was actually quite easy. First you have a room, then you have a verb, then you have a keyword, and then you have a minus or plus. A minus always indicating that a verb is mandatory, which means that you have to use the verb. Which means you have to say, look at GeekSpace or look at book or something. You can't. The other possibility would be just to type down a special keyword for this. So, and here's just one scroll view. This was the sort of screenplay where you can see all the action elements appeared from at the time they were actually called for, sort of. So now I'm going to show you some short game demo. Demo. Okay, while the intro is starting now, I'm going to tell you something about the story. You start off as the novel's main character called Nadine, and your aim. I have to show you some more. And of course, you start off in a room full of dark monitors, and your aim is to win a woman's heart and to keep it, and to improve your kahuna powers, to boost your kahuna powers, sort of. So I'm going to start the game. So this is what you see. This is text. Yeah, you see this is very text-centered, and you see all the things. What we called keywords, the things with which you can do something, are highlighted in yellow, which was a sort of compromise to make it more easily playable for people like, you know, who don't know adventure games from their heart, people like book critics or something. But you can also simply, I also introduced another dimension. You can jump on the astral plane. And go tripping. So here you see all the different rooms, and you can also have a look at them on a map. And so this game has basically two levels. You can either choose to simply play or try to play the story, doing all the riddles and stuff, and find your way through it, or you can jump from using the astral plane, you can jump from room to room and simply explore the world of this novel. Oops. That's not mine. No. Okay, start again. One step too much back. Okay, so now we're entering GeekSpace, because I want to show you some of those cool special effects I promised. As you can see from the text, that Arthur is proud to own a G4 and Athlon PC. You can see that this game was written in 2001. It's not very new anymore. So now, just type reanimation. We also included some cheats to make it more testable for us as developers, so that we could easily jump from place to place, and also for presentations to be able to show the effects like the one I'm going to show now. The story at this part is that Nadine, the main character, has just been found dead in a bathtub by Arthur and Ari, or they think it's Nadine, and they try to reanimate the body. And they think it's her. Yes. Oops. You can see it's things like this, why we wanted to use the programming language like Lingo. You could do a lot more with this, but we just had 6 months for the development of this whole game, so you can do whatever you want with this program. So let's do visual. And another thing I wanted to have, what was a good idea, was you can type in whatever you want, and the screen will do, or words will appear, which you can't influence really. This is a very nice feeling when you're sitting in front of a computer, I guess. Okay, we say yes, of course. And once more, I type whatever I want. Zack. Yeah, and of course, this is not a very nice experience, so it's natural what you do. And finally, but we'll end this presentation of a game with some romantic bits. So we go to the beach. And of course, what we do is we kiss Ari. And now look closely at the heart. Follow the heart. Yeah, isn't that nice? Yeah, see, this was something you couldn't do with Inform back then. I don't know if Jens this hasn't changed, I think, but anyway, we wanted to include some graphic stuff, so this is, yeah, personal taste. Okay, I have to get back. So, and now to some secret details I'm going to tell only tonight, sort of. Yeah, as you can guess, commercially speaking, this game had been a disaster, but we didn't do it for the money, obviously. Jens Halm and we developed it for 6 months, and I enjoyed writing it. It was a lot of fun. Also, I saw it as a bonus for my readers, but when the book came out, I was very shocked to find out that the traditional literature scene did not only ignore the game, but also seemed to find me suddenly rather suspicious, just because what I had done, like, it was all too much. They wouldn't trust me anymore. It was like, if she's doing computer stuff like this, she can't write normal books. We don't trust her. So suddenly I found myself dumped into a computer nerd's corner. Well, didn't mind that, but well, while the net literature community, actually, they were very nice and cool people. I really enjoyed hanging around with them at conferences, at festivals, even if we got mostly seated at side tables, rather on back stages and forgotten. But still, I also did get some great reviews from journalists and scientists who were courageous enough to read the book and or play the game. Of course, most of them were young, many from Austria, which was very surprising to me. A lot of hypertext fans in Austria there. Things seem to have changed now with Web 2.0 and cheap internet flat rates, but I'm not very optimistic because some writers still seem to cherish their ludism and not or simply resignate. Of course, rush a bit through the end. I also know about the limits of our project. If I would do it again, I would include the features of a mud environment. I would try to let the players enhance or improve text bits, or let them include their own media, or let them switch roles or viewpoints of a story. But as I said, in 6 months, this was all impossible. As to what I see as the future of text adventuring tools, using Macromedia Director would be pretty much outdated today. You would use for multimedia productions Flash, Flex, or Adobe Integrated Runtime, or Sans Java FX. For classical text adventures like Jens already presented in Form 7, also any other program language, or something like RenP, which Jens just introduced me to, which are visual novel games and very popular in Japan right now. They're visual and sort of like text adventures in the same, very, very interesting development. I'm very much looking forward to this. And finally, I give you some of my very personal views on when you're writing or communicating with hypertext, hyperfiction authors. There are always big discussions like programmers as code poets. I personally think they are the best programmers who really can write elegant, efficient code are poets. Digital narratives versus games. A narrative wants to tell you a good story, while an adventure game wants you to take part in a story. So it's very much, for me, in a game, it's, as an author also, it's more important to make the game playable than to write a good story. There have been studies indicating that also role-playing RPG players actually enjoy not reading a good story so much as immersing themselves by doing things in those games. But this doesn't mean that you don't have to have a good story, which is just the thing that keeps the thing going. But it's mainly action concentrated from the game point of view. As I indicated already, hypertext versus linear stories in books. Many hypertext authors think, oh, it's boring to have linear stories, which would also be text adventures to them. I personally think this is, I don't believe this. I don't believe in the liberating effect of simply breaking up things and breaking it all down, mainly because our conscience is working in a linear way. So we always consume text one by one, following another. I do believe, though, that stories will be getting more complex, like we just saw with the games Jens presented today. And you can see that people enjoy complex stories more from year to year. In the series 24, for example, in the TV series, you have also high complexity. And this is, for me, hyperfiction's main function as an art form also, simply to achieve what living, or to show people what living in postmodern times is all about, and to make them experience their own, or to let them see their own conclusions from that. So finally, where have all the hyperfiction writers gone? Or why are there more people writing articles or holding talks about hypertext literature than actually people reading or writing those games? Well, personally, I think this is because the ideas behind those games, you know, breaking up, gaining more democracy for everybody, are so fascinating, but hardly anybody really wants to experience this. People really don't want to lose their control, which they do in hypertext fiction. And there's another reason, of course, economics, the non-commercial side, consumes a lot of time and manpower. It needs talent and expertise from many fields. You will hardly find any sponsor or be able to make any money. You sometimes won't even find players or readers for your game. Of course, Jens Olich's Reconnaissance adventure being a notable exception, I hope. But an exception still, in Germany, I think, at least so. Yeah, and also I'd like to stress what Jens already said about the Guardian quote, that if there's only one thing, one genre more suicidal than writing poetry, and that's digital literature. But still, writing those games is a lot of fun, and I believe there is a future in digital storytelling. Hyperfiction's not dead, it's just taking a cat nap. And now I'm going to finish, or this is where I'm going to finish. We've given you some links. You'll find this all for download on the net. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two quick questions, don't we?
Yeah, several minutes, just. Please wait for the mic to arrive.
What advice would you have for somebody interested in getting started in writing their first text adventure game narrative?
Personally, I would say look at Inform. It's really easy. It's very well documented, but I think, well, I suspect you're a coder, so learning the language will take you like 2 days or something, and then you will spend weeks and weeks learning how to write a good story. And that I didn't know that before. It's actually much more of a problem. Learning the code and learning the syntax of the programming language is the easiest part of developing.
Or you could try to find a novelist who would cooperate with you.
Or that, yeah.
I've got another question. If you go through the hypertext, what about missing out on any stories? So you've got some tools to control if I missed out on any occasion or not, or what?
Yeah, personally I think that can be a problem, and you can either create a story that puts the reader on rails and they cannot do anything before they have solved something else, and this can be very frustrating, like in the Nintendo DS game Hotel, what was it? Room 215, you spend hours and hours of running around because you have to trigger some action for the story to go further. Or you give up and say, okay, there are so many variations to that story, and I don't have to make sure that all my lovely crafted prose is seen by everyone, but, you know, for a writer with an ego, that is sometimes hard.
Yeah, I'd also like to stress that, because it's something like in Germany we call this eierlegende Wollmilchsau, which is something I think we're still looking for, to have freedom, as much freedom to the reader and programmer as possible, but you have to make some decisions and you have to decide how much freedom you're going to give the reader. And I personally think that people like to be taken at hand and followed through a story. We don't really want to decide when watching a movie what is happening now, something. So this is an aesthetical question also, I think.
could you recommend some works of interactive fiction that you really liked or that show what's possible with a genre, more recent works than the ones from Infocom?
Yeah, sure. You could look at the works of Graham Nelson himself. There's one piece called Curses, which is freely available on the internet, which defines like the modern interactive fiction after its commercial collapse. It's very nice. There are also games by an author that goes by the name of Emily Short, a pseudonym, I think. And she has written one very impressive piece called Galatia, which retells the story of the Greek myth of, you know, the artist falling in love with its own creation. And this is especially impressive because you can actually talk to that statue, and there are dozens and dozens of ways how the story could actually end, and there are dozens and dozens of topics you can bring up in the conversation. Also, there's a very short play, a very short game which has something that not many games have. It has absolute replay value, because it's called 9:05, the time of the day, 9:05 a.m. And in that game, you will wake up in a house, will get a phone call, and someone is ordering you to work, and then you will do that, but play that game through. It takes you like 15 minutes, and then you will see why you have to play it again. Okay, I'm not giving away the point of the story, but play through it. That's also very nice. But there are hundreds of authors who publish their interactive fiction on the internet, especially written in Inform, and no one is expecting any penny for that because they couldn't possibly sell it anyway.
I'd also like anybody who's interested in not only what's happening in text adventures and with Inform, but hyperfiction in generally. The first link, Dichtung Digital, is very good. It's not only articles in German, also a lot of them in English or Spanish or whatever. There's a lot of things happening, but not so much in Germany, I think. Yeah.
Also, as a closing remark, I would say it's a kind of a problem because the worlds of arts and the worlds of hackers don't seem to overlap that much. Literary critics are very good at making big words about how revolutionary that system is and how full interactivity and non-linear storytelling would revolutionize everything, but they couldn't code shit. And on the other hand, you have hackers who are gifted programmers, but they don't read anything apart from comic books and are not interested in telling complex stories. So if you don't have a project at this camp, think about a really good complex story that you would like to tell to the world and start programming in one of the tools we mentioned. There's another question.
I just have a remark. I think there's a contest every year, interactive fiction contest, and the works are usually quite short. You can play them through in a few minutes sometimes, and you can vote on the stories you like best. And I think it's a good start on the one hand to see what's possible in the genre, and also if you want some motivation to write a game yourself, to write an entry in that contest.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks also for me.